Howdy, folks. Happy Friday. Thank God it's Friday. We got lots to discuss today. It's football playoff weekend again, divisional playoff round. And a lot of people in Buffalo are very interested. And of course, Russ, that's going to be the Sunday night game. So we have to wait through three other games for that one. And, my feelings. I think they're going to lose. But anyway,
I think you're right, but
let's start with the pre-show. Go ahead. Go ahead, Cap.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Cap. You had something you wanted to talk about.
I did. Yeah. No. Obviously, Meatloaf passed away, and for people of my generation, his "Bad Out of Hell" album was, a monumental release. And when you're a sports writer, people just assume that you only interview sports figures. But during the course of my career, I've met a whole lot of different people from all walks of life, and sometimes not from to do interviews with, but because I'm out doing work, I run across them. And that's what happened with Meatloaf. I was on an assignment, and it was one of those, there was a party that was associated with it. It was a very small gathering of 100 people. And at my table, besides my wife and somebody from Upper Deck that I knew well, was Meatloaf. And he sat next to me. And we were there about 2 hours. And it turned out he was a JV baseball coach out in California. And both he and I had a shared love of fantasy baseball. Now, this was about 30 years ago, so this was kind of early in the fantasy baseball league. But he and I sat and talked for almost an hour about the strategies of fantasy baseball, and we talked about the importance of pitchers versus hitters. And it was just, he was so different than you can imagine him on stage. Like, he was just a run-of-the-mill guy. Who coached baseball, and on weekends was worried about his fantasy team and all that kind of stuff. And so after a while, there was someone at our table who had been trying to get him to sing. And lo and behold, I would say after we were there an hour and a half, he sang 2 out of 3 aren't bad. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. So a cappella right at our table. It was
nice.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it was. It was unbelievable. So
now, you can't. Okay, Russ, you can't call him a one-hit wonder, because as we discussed, he had 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and he had the infamous. I say infamous because boy, was it the sort of beaten into the ground. Paradise by the Dashboard Light.
Well, the Phil Rizzuto stuff is part of the reason why.
Well, right, and if for people who don't know, Phil Rizzuto went in and did the sort of the play-by-play thing, not knowing that it would be used in the context that it was used, because obviously it was being used in the context of somebody trying to have sex with his girlfriend, right. And Rizzuto thought it was like play-by-play for a baseball game. So when it came out, he was not aghast, but he felt a little ashamed that it was being used in that way. And then the famous "Bad Out of Two," Return to Hell, I think it was the title of the album. And what was it? I can't remember the name of the song, Russ. Do Anything for Love.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, he's not a one-hit wonder. It's not like Falco or.
No, he had a few more.
That second album was a pretty major hit as well.
It did. Yeah, he made it. It was sort of a comeback thing. But what I was curious about, and the thing is, I remember, his career in between the 2 albums was more as an actor than a musician.
Yeah.
He did a lot of character roles. He was in.
Probably did The Equalizer.
He was in Fight Club, and I think the preeminent role was a appearance on The Equalizer in 19.
It really was. I was just making that up.
Yep. I was waiting until after the show to post the picture of him and Ed Woodward, where he plays a gun dealer. Yes, it was.
That's perfect.
He was great in The Equalizer. So
So now I'm going to play Mind Reader. Kevin, your Upper Deck person was Rich Bradley.
It was not. It was Jill Steinberg.
Oh, okay. Because Rich
So-
Bradley was there too, and he actually he worked for Upper Deck at the time. I saw him post it. He's also worked for Fleer, but he does scoring for the away team.
Yeah, he was
Wells
with
Fargo.
Fleer. He was at Fleer. This was in the
He was
early,
at Fleer at the time. Okay.
yeah, in early 90s. But the other thing I remember, the Kelsey Grammer was there as well. And we were in a large group. This was before we all sat down. And somebody came up and they were talking to Meatloaf. And the guy said, he goes, I don't know, how do I address you? Are you Mr. Loaf? Are you me? And Kelsey Grammer just lost it. That was the funniest thing.
Mr. Loaf.
I do want to point this out too. Now that we have laughed about it, I do think Meatloaf the Dish is dead too. I do. I don't see it anywhere anymore.
Well, okay, this is the thing that made we never made meatloaf at my house, thank God. And when I've seen multiple like recipes like on Diners, Drive-ins, and Dives, and one of the things that they put in meatloaf is ketchup. And thank God I never ate.
No, my mother didn't use ketchup.
No.
But an egg in the middle was the thing.
Well, that was the binder. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, in the 1960s and into the 70s, you had meatloaf once a week.
Yeah.
It was like Wednesday's meatloaf day, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, peas, or corn.
Yep. And now you don't see it anywhere.
Yeah.
Almost every diner serves it.
Yeah, I guess diners have it.
That was like in the 70s when I was a kid. It was like meatloaf in some places. Hamburger Helper.
Hamburger Helper was big in the 70s for sure.
Yes.
There was when I was in college, there was a bar. It was George's, and what they were known for was their meatloaf sandwiches. You could go in and get a meatloaf sandwich, but it was served with ketchup. I'm sorry, Mike.
I would never buy that, Kev, because that was like a leftover in my house. The meatloaf sandwich was like a leftover, and I'm not paying extra money for that.
To be honest, but I think that's why it was such a hit, because everybody went out to college and there was no, you didn't get meatloaf anymore, so you'd get the sandwich. But what I remember most is, guys on the college paper, we would go to the bar and we'd get the meatloaf sandwich, and then we'd go in the back room and play euchre all night.
Now, there is an infamous bar in Buffalo called the Pink Flamingo, the Old Pink. It's I think we were there in 2016. It was some place where a lot of the reporters hang out. Not the
was
one.
That the place with the outdoor deck?
No, that was a different place. That was Swanee House.
I knew it had a bird name though.
Yeah.
You know what else is a food that's kind of going? I actually have seen a story about this. That's going by the wayside is the ice cream sundae, because it's giving way. Yeah, blizzards. The youth of today are all McFlurry Blizzard type people, and they don't. So when I was a kid, you wanted to go and you get a hot fudge sundae or a strawberry sundae or whatever. Yeah. And now when people go to Dairy Queen, they almost always get Blizzards, especially the kids.
Yeah, that's a shame. I have to tell younger people out there, go to YouTube and look up an episode of Bob Newhart, The Whale, and this is an episode where they, because Friendlies used to have the Jim Dandy and they would dare you to eat it. And it had 7 scoops of ice cream and a whole banana and whatever. And Bob Newhart did a takeoff on that on his show one time. And it was hilarious.
Well, to your point, Kev, like Sonic, which is near where I live, and other ice cream places. Yeah. It's the Blizzard, or I can't remember, the Arctic Blast or whatever they call it. That's like $4, whereas the hot fudge sundae is like $2, and it's like it's almost like people don't get the sundaes anymore, so they're trying to make it more attractive.
Yeah.
Now, what I was going to say is the bar that I was talking about, their speciality is the fried bologna sandwich. They have the bologna cut like a 1/2 inch thick and fried on both sides, and then with fried onions. That's the Buffalo, I think, the version of I don't know any place around here that does the meatloaf sandwich, but the fried bologna.
That's the only dish my dad could make, was fried bologna and eggs. He couldn't cook anything else, but he knew how to make that.
The fried bologna had to be the ring bologna though, in order.
No. Ours was the Hebrew National and the chunk bologna, and you just sliced it a certain way. But we would use the Hebrew National.
What was I going to say about the other thing when I was a kid, Spam was the thing.
I tried it once. I couldn't do it.
If you fry up Spam, it's not terrible.
It's actually pretty good. Spam is huge in Korea.
I know it is massive.
Like at Christmas, like everybody buys their Spam because
you know why. You know why it's huge?
Military. It's military.
Well, my father served in Korea in the U.S. Army, and the rations that they got every week, most of it was Hershey's chocolate bars and Spam. So I will bet you anything that so many of the U.S. military gave that stuff away because they were sick of it, and probably Korean people who were starving loved it. So that's.
But that's also I think we talked about this, but that's also I think. Not Korea. It could be China, where they have like Kentucky Fried Chicken on Christmas.
That's Japan. That's Japan,
right?
Which is
crazy to me
because I've had we do at our family. It's called the Reindeer Games, which is just this massive trivia contest that I put together.
Okay.
And one of the things I had here was what was the number one food consumed on Christmas Day in Japan, and it's
it definitely isn't Chinese food.
So no, but that's a really big thing in Christmas here in United States because it's kind of a Jewish tradition to go out.
It is. It's definitely one.
Christmas. For me, Christmas Eve. Even though like I'm Italian and it's the the 7 fishes thing, we never did that on Christmas Eve. It was either pizza or Chinese food for Jews, I would assume on Christmas, since Christmas isn't as important of a holiday as it is for Christians, Catholics. Chinese food makes sense. But anyway, all right, let's start the show. We'll hopefully be joined by Ak, and we'll be joined by Anthony in a few minutes. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Friday, January 21st, 2022.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
Kevin Allen, Hockey Buzz.
And Russ, I didn't have to look at my phone. I'm Michael Lachelle. I'm Michael Lachelle, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. All right, let's start with this because it was focused on last night. I was checking in the number of the scores, and the one that stood out was 6-0 Florida over the Edmonton Oilers. And we've talked about it a couple times this week, Kevin. I just want to touch on it briefly, but Mikko Koskinen had to play. Stuart Skinner's out with COVID. Mike Smith is out with an injury. Alex Stalock apparently cannot play right now. So they're stuck playing Koskinen. And from what I understand, after they dominated the first period, but Florida scored the opening goal, and then essentially Edmonton, just collapsed. And this is getting to the point now where, they're starting to fall behind in the playoff race. And I'm just wondering, what Ken Holland is going to do.
Well, I saw TSN's reported that they've had discussions with Columbus about Korpisalo, but the problem with that is that he hasn't played particularly well this season. And you may just be getting another. I was just looking at the advanced stats, and I would noted that in saves, goals prevented that versus the average goalie, the best guy in the league is Shesterkin, who's saved like 39 goals that should have gone in comparison to an average goalie. But the worst goalie in the league was Grubauer, but the second worst was Korpisalo, and just has a negative number. He's given up more goals than the average goalie would give up. So I'm not sure he's the answer. But we always talk about there's no such thing as style points in hockey. You either win or you don't. But that game last night, to me, when you lose 6-0, I don't care how good Florida is because they're very good. Mm-hmm. But they weren't in it. Like, they didn't get started, they didn't get going, they weren't competitive. That was just a thrashing, and they just weren't there. And I think that's always a sign of a team that's waiting for something to happen. And The natives are restless in Edmonton. So
now, Russ, Elliot Friedman was talking on the daily podcast or daily radio broadcast with Jeff Merrick about Ville Husso, about Semyon Varlamov. Corpusalo was not mentioned on the show today, but has been mentioned in the past. I even heard something, and I don't know whether Edmonton would go for this, but Kevin would know how Holland thought of Peter Mrazek when he was in Detroit, because Mrazek is signed for 2 more years. Koskinen is a rental is an expiring contract, and with the Leafs looking maybe to open up space down the line, maybe a Mrazek for Koskinen deal would be a possibility. But I don't know if that really improves them, because Mrazek's played a grand total of 4 games this year. But the overall theme here is they better get a goaltender pretty soon, or they're in deep trouble.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on in that division too. The LA Kings are playing better, and I've been watching that team, and I like that team. We all knew they had a bunch of younger players, and now those younger players are starting to come of age, and
they got Byfield back yesterday.
Yeah, right.
I know they lost to Colorado, but yeah, I mean they're still in the race right now, and this is where things stand in the West right now. Edmonton right now, they're second last in the West. Or in the Pacific Division, excuse me. I was looking at the Pacific Division records. In the West right now, they have 38 points. They're behind Vancouver. They're ahead of only Chicago, Arizona, and Seattle. Russ, they've got to start jump starting pretty soon.
And here's the other thing too. Before Russ gets in, look before yesterday's game, they've got to play their last 47 games in 100 days. So essentially, they're going to be playing every other day, and they really need a second goalie as well.
Yeah, Russ, from what they were saying, Koskinen's going through a crisis of confidence right now, and I understand that. I don't think it's a crisis of confidence. I just don't think he's a good goaltender, and I've said that for 2 years.
Yeah, I felt the same way. There was probably a couple weeks this year where he played okay, but the whole world knows what Mikko Koskinen is. And the whole world knows Edmonton needs a goalie, and there's a million goalies available, and not all of them are going to get traded. That's just a reality.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Now, Russ, I've been jokingly saying to Eck on the show that, as much as I bring up the "it's over" sign for the Islanders, it's getting to be the same for the Philadelphia Flyers. And you were at that game yesterday against Columbus, which thankfully I didn't watch any, but apparently it was like watching paint dry, according to a couple of people that were at the game. And now we find out today that Joel Farabee is out, and along with Kevin Hayes. But the organization is sort of lying to themselves right now for where the team is at this point.
No question. So this is a multifaceted problem here. So the first problem is, they have a lot of players injured, but they were playing like crap before all these players got injured. So that's not an excuse. I picked them 6th before the season began for a reason, because I did not buy in to all of this gelling, and it's been more than that. It's actually been more than that and worse than what I thought it would be. So there's that. The second part is, I'm not sure Mike Yo's message is even getting through to anybody. He's a good guy. He's trying his best, but he's been there before, and I think they've already tuned him out, hence the 10 losses in a row, their second 10-game losing streak, and not that many games of a season. Third is, they have not scored a shootout goal this entire season. A shootout goal. They're 0 for 16 in shootouts. It's almost impossible to not have a shootout goal. So there's that. I did see Claude Giroux holding his wrist at the end of the game, hunched over. There's that. And yet, because games are poorly attended right now, and Comcast has a lot of hubris, and nobody is going to throw up the white flag, and they're going to act like they're in it because they want their fans to show up, and they're doing their best to kind of do things, promote things to keep their fans interested. And this is why they're not going to do like a full rebuild, because they put a lot of money into renovations in that building. Then the pandemic hit, and they're trying to get that money back. They're not going to, and they saw what happened to the 76ers. Nobody showed up for those 76ers game when everybody was trusting the process. Nobody was in the stands for that. And to be fair, since they haven't won a championship or even made it to the finals, you can't even say that was fully a success. They got some good players, but it hasn't really worked out the way it was envisioned. And so I think because they play in the same building, Flyers management, who also tends to, not Chuck, but Dave Scott, tend to talk to the older players a lot. And I fear that that's bad advice. No offense to those guys, but they should not be in advisory positions anymore from, the 70s, from those championship teams. They should have other people in there, and they don't. So all of those things are happening. And the best thing I can tell you is, remember that year after the lockout where they were like in last place?
Yeah.
Everything feels like that right now. And honestly, they're a bottom 5 team in the league. That's what they are.
So that was 07, and I remember
Yes.
that year they traded. That was when they got Marty Baron from Buffalo, and I think that was Dinah Zubris going to Buffalo, and Marty Baron was part of the deal, and they got a first round pick. That made sense because I think Zubris was an expiring contract, and they weren't going to re-sign him, and they got a first round pick back for it. And they kept that's where, like I look at from an outside perspective, I look at Philadelphia, and I'm not saying, okay, you don't have to tear down the team completely. You've got too many long-term contracts. But when you have players such as Ristolainen, such as Giroux, who would be at the top of most teams' rental forward list, rental forward and rental defenseman list, and you don't move them, I think that's just dumb management. Again, that's my point of view.
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, we don't know exactly what they want to do with Giroux, and we don't know what he wants to do. Like,
Right.
They may know.
I don't think they know yet. I really don't think they know yet.
But like if they've got to get assurances from Giroux that he wants to come back, and if they want to sign him, or else they should consider that. Although, somebody made a good point to me as the general manager. He said, we've talked about this all the time. What makes you think that moving an $8 million player is going to be easy? He said, I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but he said, it's hard. He said, I don't think anybody really is grasping how difficult it's going to be to move all of these players. Sure. When he goes, he says, always there's 3 or 4 that are capped out. He said, but we got everybody capped out.
Yeah,
so,
the way I envisioned the Flyers making a trade, and I do think they'll move some guys at the deadline, but I expect like a 4-player deal, 5-player deal kind of thing with another team to balance everything out. That's what I'm expecting from them. And to get somebody with term on the other end for them so they can sell that to the fan base.
Yeah, and Kev, I think it was Friedman in his column this week that along the lines of what you mentioned in terms of the teams that would be sort of kingmakers that would be willing to be the third team. He mentioned Detroit, he mentioned Columbus, Buffalo, and Arizona, but was quick to point out that Arizona has only got one, like I mentioned, one slot in terms of retention. So they might be able to do that on Kessel in a deal, but then they can't do that in any other, or act as a third party in those deals. Philadelphia, I mean, Russ, you can get a good return and probably, reap the same reward that you gave up to get Ristolainen. And if you trade him at the deadline, you can recoup the first round pick.
But I think there's a thought that they might try and keep him if he's willing to stay because he's having a good year and he seems to like it. So they may not go that route. There were a lot of scouts at the game yesterday, and it's simply because Philly and Columbus are pretty close to being out of it. If you want to hold on to the mathematical thing, go ahead. And their teams are looking. And Laine scored a goal last night, and Laine is going to be one of the premier guys on the market. There's no question about it.
And he's an RFA at the end of the year. But the question is, I mean, we don't know how much he likes Columbus, whether he's willing to sign an extension in Columbus. And if
the only thing I can tell you is I've talked to some people, not anybody on the inside or anything, but just, people who follow the team and that market. And There was talk at the beginning of the year that he liked it there and maybe he would stay, but they haven't signed any kind of extension. And so for me, my gut feeling is telling me that they're going to try and deal him.
Now, Kev, I want to touch on some of the things that you wrote about in your column. One was the beginning part about Brad Marchand, who was injured
last night. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're being very circumspect about how he's not playing their next game, and they're not saying anything about the severity of the injury. But just over the last, he's extremely entertaining. I mean, of course, he's got the reputation of being the premier rat in the league. But this, going back and forth with the Carolina Hurricanes. And I didn't know about the Trocheck part and the Lamborghini thing. What I heard about was, his accusation for some reason that Carolina was responsible for 20% of escrow, and then Alan, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say that was him just kind of sticking that their attendance is bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Alan, and then of course Alan Walsh, who's got to dip his toe in the water of every conversation on Twitter, came out and said, "Well, no, they're not responsible." And he says the players who stabbed Bob Goodnow in the back were responsible. It's like it went on a completely different tangent.
Yeah, I just questioned, is it good for Marchand to put that tweet out after you got the snot knocked out of you? Is that really the time for it?
Yeah. Well. Yeah, I mean the timing of that. I didn't mind the beginning of it. I thought it was like when Trocheck was asked by the Carolina Reporter, "Is your playing style like Marchand?" He replied, "Are you calling me a rat?" And so. And then so that got out there, and Marchand just then did the comparison of the two players. Well, and then he said it's a Lamborghini and a Prius. To me, that's schoolyard stuff, and it's kind of funny. You know what I mean? Right. That's the more people I wouldn't call that a Twitter war.
No,
that's your mama wears army boots type stuff from the 1960s. Yeah. So, but then. They have the game, and there is a history between the two players that goes back 3 or 4 years. If you remember, Trocheck or Marchand went after Huberdeau, and Trocheck went after Marchand, and so there's a little bit of a history there. And then of course after the game, the Carolina Hurricanes Twitter feed is one of the sassier Twitter feeds in the league.
Them and the LA Kings.
Kings are good, and they basically. Instead of saying L is for losers, they said L is for Lamborghinis, is what they said. And then that's when Marchand, and it's a pretty clever response, to be honest with you, said, you guys are responsible for the 20%, which was just a kind of a sophisticated way to say, you guys just don't draw,
Right.
So anyway, that's how we have. But it's just a bad optic. I didn't put this in there, but I don't know why any player would be on social media these days. Mostly it can just be bad for you.
Yes. Extrapolating from that, Kev, because I watched a little of the Buffalo-Dallas game yesterday, and there were hardly any fans at KeyBank Center. And I'm watching a number of games, and you see more empty seats than people. And then yesterday when it came out, or a couple days ago when it came out, that the Ontario government is only going to allow 500 fans up until the middle of February, and then up to 50% until the middle of March, and then full capacity. And the report is for each game at Scotiabank Arena, it's $3.5 million in revenue. Good luck in terms of that $1 million increase on the cap next year. It's not happening.
Yeah, and this is really COVID related. People, even though this new variation isn't as severe in terms of the percentage of deaths, as I mentioned before, I had a son-in-law who had it, and he was really sick, and basically his message was, boy, you don't want to get this. Now I've had other friends that have had no symptoms at all. My grandson has it now, and he's doing fine. So, but because of that, people are just saying, I just would rather not go and pick it up, and that's why a lot of people just aren't going to games. They just don't.
We have to believe that March 13th Heritage Classic is in trouble.
Well, yeah, and we welcome Anthony into the show, and I'll bring in on because I wanted to ask you about the Flyers game yesterday. We talked about the Flyers, but I wanted to get your point of view on it, on the state of the franchise right now. But yeah, the increase to 100% capacity is the day after when the Heritage Classic is scheduled to be in Hamilton. Now it's an outdoor game, so right now it's not for sure what's going to happen. But based on the way Ontario has been, extra, double secret careful about, gatherings, they probably are not going to say any more than 50%. And if it's only 50%, they can't make money on it. They will cancel it. They will postpone it to next year. But, based on the fact that, right now it's cost probably, I did some rough calculation. The Leaf 50%, 500 fans up to full capacity. It's probably going to cost about $20 to $25 million in revenue. That's not a drop in the bucket. So they want the Heritage Classic. It's not like a 60,000 seat venue. It's I think it's 25, but they still could make pretty good money on that and make up some of that deficit. But anyway, Anthony, you were at the game last night. Russ.
Actually, that was Russ. I was not. I was.
Oh, okay.
From home. I covered it from home, but
okay.
Yes.
But you did watch it, and you do know the status of the franchise, and you did report about Farabee being injured, and we all talked about the fact that the organization seems to be in a state of denial right now because, in my mind, from an outside perspective, they should be full on at least reset. And from what Russ is saying is that they're saying, well, no, we don't need to reset. We can re-sign Ristolainen. I mean, it's bizarre. It's like, I mean, they're one of the worst teams in the league right now, the way that they're playing.
I think it's a bit of posturing, public facing. They're just not, again, at this point, again, is it an optimal time for them to begin a sell-off? The answer is no, not at this point. Doesn't mean you're not getting phone calls. Doesn't mean you're not, you may not be out there shopping players, but I have no doubt they're certainly beginning to get phone calls on players. Certainly a Ristolainen. Giroux, haven't heard that just yet. But again, I think as we get closer to the trade deadline, it becomes more and more of a possibility. But you hear it from the players. We all heard from Cam Atkinson about the team psychology right now is really bad. The team dynamic, it's just not good. From that standpoint of the minute they gave up that first goal, there was the quote at this point that obviously resonates is there was no energy, no pop on the bench. Like it's a bit of a here we go again. They're basically they feel like they're Team Murphy's Law is probably the best way to describe them right now. But they still sort of have this mindset that they're not completely out of it, but it's sort of, I think a lot of this is sort of public facing. And Giroux acknowledged it the other night in that saying they know where they're at. They know how far out that they are. But they're just, again, not necessarily, publicly at least, not yet ready to sort of give up the season.
Let me pose this question to the panel. I mean, because Anthony brought up a good point. I wouldn't consider embracing a rebuild if I was the Flyers either. It seems to me we're starting to sort of trending toward the minute something goes wrong, you want to start rebuilding. And
right.
I wouldn't do that. A reset maybe is a better word, but
there's too many. And Kevin, there's too many. Again, the amount of players they've recently signed to long-term contracts, Provorov, Couturier.
Right.
The big question obviously becomes Claude Giroux. He was the one that, again, they did not come to an extension in the offseason, and that's probably the biggest question mark at the moment as to what might happen with him. But there's a lot, again, in terms of a rebuild or a reset, again, they've made a lot of commitments here to a lot of players on this team. Joel Farabee, obviously.
Ellis,
just signed on
Kevin Hayes.
Right. Kevin Hayes. There's just a lot of money that's sunk.
Yeah.
And Carter Hart is not, hasn't distinguished himself in the last two seasons, but rebuilding teams are looking for a goalie like Carter Hart. Now,
right. Right.
He's still got to kind of do it, but but he's still young,
Yes.
Do you think Edmonton would kill? He's from Alberta, right?
Yeah.
Yes. You think Edmonton would kill to get Carter Hart right now? I mean,
They should have drafted him.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean,
again, Philadelphia. Again, the Hart. It's one of those. It's what makes this year such a strange one, is because last year you really could tie in many ways the play of the goaltenders as part of what went down. That's not true this season.
Yeah.
With Hart, and Jones has been up and down, but I think he's been okay. I think he's had, of late it hasn't been as good for Jones, but goaltending is not the goaltending at the moment right now is not the area of concern.
No. That was the other name that was mentioned in connection with Edmonton by Friedman was Martin Jones, which he's on a 1-year contract, so and not a ridiculous cap hit, so that would make sense.
He's not going to win them anything.
That's a ridiculous idea, though.
Yeah, it is. He's not going to win them anything. Honestly, here's my. Everybody could talk about like, hey, this goal's not somebody's fault, or this isn't, or that isn't, but what I have said this year that has basically been true for 90% of his starts is he's going to give up 3 goals. 3 goals are going to go in the net, no matter how they do it. And Edmonton doesn't need that. That's not going to win it for Edmonton.
No. Now the old expression about lawyers, how do you know if they're lying? Well, if their lips are moving, sometimes can be associated with NHL general managers. Now, I don't know whether that's the case when it comes to Julien Brisebois coming out last month. I think Kevin saying that. He's comfortable with his team and that he's going to probably not make any moves. I think if there's a possibility of making a move, he'll make a move if he can fit it. Right now, their cap situation.
Yeah. Actually, I think what he actually said is he didn't have the ability to make a move. Like he said, I'd have to move someone off my team, and I like all the players on my team. So.
And Don Waddell said something similar.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean. The question is, it's really going to be hard for these contenders who are right up against it to be able to make a move unless they find teams that work with them that, and those teams are not going to do it as a favor. Those teams are going to do it for a return. So, if you trade with a third team, like say Toronto did with Nick Foligno last year, and they traded him through San Jose, they gave San Jose Alexander Barabanov and a draft pick, and Barabanov has turned out to be a pretty decent forward. So you have to give these teams that are going to be the middleman in these deals something, as well as giving the team that you're actually trading with something. So it's going to be doubly costly.
Yeah, and you still got to get it low enough. Like like that's difficult. I mean, that's why Klingberg and probably Sherrod are going to be so palatable, because if you could work a third team and you could get them down $1 million, which is just then, that's just, trade one guy for another, which you can do on your roster. So,
and also because you mentioned San Jose, Mike, and they've been able to stay competitive, they're going to make out on Hurdle too.
Yeah, they will. Well, but the thing is, and we still don't know the result of the Vander Kane investigation and the arbitration, and whether San Jose will be cleared of the $7 million for the next 3 years. The rumor is out there that they want to spend that $7 million going forward to re-sign Hurdle. And if they re-sign, Hurdle's making, I think, a little under $6 million right now, and he's having a good year. Probably you would be in that $7 million range to get him signed on a long-term deal.
But here's what I don't understand about that, and explain this to me, because no one else, and I've asked this of people who should know, and they just shrug. Why is it such a big deal to get to what Hurdle needs when he's already at 6? So essentially, you're just adding $2 million. Like, why has this been? To me, that says this isn't necessarily about money, because even if you were going to 8.5, you're just adding 2.5. He's already at 6. So.
Well, unless they expect to take some sort of cap hit on Kane that they think that they might not be able to, clear that, then you have to add that into the, it could be a buyout situation, and then you're taking, half of the cap hit or something like that.
But unlike other teams where you can go up and down, like, you can look at Tampa Bay and Carolina and see that there's difficulty taking out. I can look at San Jose's roster and I can pick off 2 or 3 guys.
Maybe he just doesn't want to play there anymore. Like
that's my point. I mean, maybe this isn't the money. Maybe this is, something else. So, I mean, we'll have to see how this works out. But almost everybody,
he's been talked about for 2 years. That's the only reason I think that may be the case. Like, yeah.
So, but I everyone seems to think that the Sharks are going to make one last bid to get him signed. So,
okay.
But if you haven't got him signed by now, I mean,
usually
the player says, I kind of owe it to myself to go out and see what's out there. That's what they generally say.
Yeah. Now, there are GM searches going on in 3 places. Chicago, although Chicago is more. There is an interpretation here that with Chicago it might be team president and not general manager. That Kyle Davidson might be the guy that they stick with there. In Anaheim, they're apparently interviewing up to a dozen people. Vancouver, we've heard Patrick Alvin's name mentioned. Now, Kevin, your column you mentioned in Chicago, the name that has been hopping around is a very familiar name.
Well, Eddie Olczyk, and this came out almost immediately when Stan Bowman stepped down, and to me, it's the perfect solution, because what you want to accomplish here is to have a guy who seems like fresh and not old school, but you want him to have knowledge of the league, and you want something you can sell to the fan base, because you've lost a layer of trust with your fans, and the way to accomplish that, I think, is to hire Eddie Olczyk. He is. Like, you couldn't have a higher favorable rating than Eddie does in Chicago. In fact, in the whole league,
he's the easiest guy to talk to too. Like, he would relate well to fans.
I just think he'd be the perfect guy, and I would do exactly what they've done, in Montreal and in Columbus. I would make Eddie the director of hockey operations, so he has the final say. But part of his job would be to regain the trust of the fans.
That would be a PR grand slam home run.
The bigger thing is, Kev, why are we hearing that Kane and Taves are untouchables? Why are they untouchables at this point?
Well, first of all, I think it's easy to say that about Taves, because I think you could have a hard time moving that salary.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe that with him, but. I think they still believe, maybe wrongly, that they can compete if they make some changes. So we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, they both have a year left in their contracts. They're both making $10.5 million. I don't know if the desire is there on the part of Kane to be exclusive to Chicago for his entire career. I think the way he's playing right now, after his contract is over there, they might want to re-sign him, but he, might want to go someplace else and try to get another Stanley Cup or 2 before the end of his career.
And he's never going to make that amount of money again either.
No, he's not, but he could make significant money. And with Taves, I mean, he's got a year left. If they bought him out, he's not having a particularly good year. Is the desire to go to Winnipeg and play for his home team before he retire? Or, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's in his head, but I don't know.
He's in an interesting spot too, Kane. I would say, again, I kind of almost pair him up a little bit like Claude Giroux in some ways. The difference is that Giroux is the one thing that's not on his resume is the Stanley Cup, whereas Kane, obviously multiple Stanley Cup championships. The question is whether or not, he wants to complete his career in Chicago, be one of, again, it's difficult in this day and age for players to kind of call their shots and basically, stay there until the end of his career. I think that's a possibility with Kane, especially considering how the Blackhawks tried to invest this offseason with the players that they acquired, trying to restructure. It seemed to me like that was a signal to try to kind of make sure that those 2 players, both Kane and Taves, want to stay around want to continue to stay around for the long term, especially in Kane's case.
Yeah, I'll just say this. as much as Taves might want to go back and play for Winnipeg, that's always been talk that he might want to. Patrick Kane is not going to want to come to Buffalo. And not because anything. He's gotten in trouble in the past in Buffalo, and the franchise is not where it needs to be. He's going to go someplace if he's after next year, or even after this season, if he gets traded with a year left in his contract, he's going to go to a team that's going to be close to winning a Stanley Cup, that can afford him and fit him on under their salary cap. So I mean, it's not that's always been the rumor. Oh, Kane, bring the prodigal son back home. No,
I don't have any inside information on this, but I do know Patrick. I've known him for a very long time, and this is just a guess, but I think he's going to stay in Chicago. I think he likes being a Blackhawk. I think it means something to him, and again, that's just a guess, but that's what I would say.
And Russ. And Russ, I was just looking at the scoring for the Hawks, and every time I look at this, I just shake my head. Alex DeBrincat, 32 points, 23 goals.
And there's talk that he's on the market. Like, I saw this in a report, and I laughed. I'm like, there's no way they could trade DeBrincat.
Yeah,
no way.
They're not trading DeBrincat.
Unless the player wants to be moved.
Right, but I don't think he does.
That would be the only circumstance.
Well, okay. He's making $6.4 million. He's up after next year. It's not a problem in terms of them fitting him in, because that's when Taves and Kane's contract expires, so they'll have the money. It's the only thing I can think of is if he thinks that the team is not going anywhere, and he's saying, I want to go someplace where I can win. If you're not going to be competitive, but I don't get that, because they did bring in Seth Jones. I think that they have. Right now, this season their season has been derailed by everything that happened with Bowman and the upheaval in the organization.
They're doing the same. Look, the Blackhawks are doing the same thing that the Flyers are. They're desperately afraid of having an empty place like it was before Kane and Taves and Keith and Seabrook were there. And so they're doing everything they can to rotate players in and out and hope they catch fire, but to keep fans interested. That's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Russ, just talking about goal scorers, it's like on Wednesday when the Leafs played the Rangers, Chris Kreider's got 25 goals.
Yeah.
I've always thought he was a good player, but not, somebody who's going to score 50. And he's on pace to score 50.
Yeah, I never thought he would score 50, but I told people that the Rangers have not had that many great homegrown scorers like that. And when he was drafted, I felt like he was going to be their best one. And I may have even said since John Rattel at that point, for at least being able to get goals, not for the entire package, because John Rattel will get 100 points a year. Kreider will never do that. And it took a little while for Kreider. And then last year I was on Sirius XM, and I went on just after a Ranger fan who was like, this is a horrible contract. You have to trade him. Chris Kreider is no good. And I laughed at that. And I said, wait until you see Chris Kreider. I said, he's had some problems. He's had some ups and downs, but he will figure it out, and that will be a good contract. And last year it started to happen, and then they changed the coach. And then I knew at that point, and I'll tell you how confident I was. I made a trade for him in a Dynasty Fantasy League and made sure I got Chris Kreider, because I knew with Gallant, he would be right in front of the net, and he would be on the power play in front of the net. And then if he got confidence from that, he would start to score from other places. And Mike, that goal that he got against the Leafs was one of his best goals of the year. And that's something he used to be able to do in college and in international play. And for whatever reason, maybe different usage, maybe people always expected him to be a power forward. He's not a power forward. He's a guy who could squat 500 pounds, but he really is a finesse guy when you get down to it. He'll occasionally push somebody. But the thing is, if Chris Kreider's in the crease, he's strong enough to stay in the crease, and he's figured that out.
Now, Kev, you wrote about the race for the Calder at sort of the halfway mark of the season, And right now it's a battle between Trevor Zegras and Lucas Raymond, and it's a question of like who might be the third in that race. But even if there's not a great third guy in that race, that's a pretty good race. 1-2 is Zegras versus.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure they should be 1-2. I mean, I think more it's Sider should be.
Yeah, Sider's really not getting the mentions he should.
No, I mean, Sider is already the best defenseman and the second best player on the Red Wings.
Right.
And he's 20 years old. He's playing almost 23 minutes a game. And as I, point out, he has a pile of points that he's gotten by simply playing defense. And by that, I mean, he's taking no chances. Ultimately, at some point, you're going to see him drive into the slot and take shots from 12, 15 feet. Yeah. They're expecting Edvinson next season that he'll be carrying the puck. And, I've seen him play in Sweden. He often ends up behind the opposition net, even though he's a defenseman. Mm-hmm. Well, Sider can do that too. He just chooses not to. But even though he's being, what I would say is pretty conservative, he still has a pile of points. Because
he was like that in the DEL too, Kev. When he was in the DEL and he was a young guy, he didn't want to sort of like be too risky because then he would lose playing time, but he still could play to his strengths. And his strengths are he's a great skater, he can control the puck, and he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. And he has a lot of offensive talent. So you're right.
Yeah.
Once he gets that extra confidence in him, he's going to be getting 60 points a year.
Yeah, he will easily. And, if you see it when they go into overtime, like when there's 3-on-3, all of a sudden he becomes dynamic. Yeah. Because he can. He's a very gifted skater and he's got great offensive instincts. But the other guy that I think is important to keep in this race is Jeannot. Yeah. He's got nobody's paid attention, but he's leading all rookies now in goals, and he's 6th in the league in hits. He is a high impact player. Like he's crushing defensemen. Among those defensemen he crushed was Moritz Seider. Just slammed him into the boards, and Seider had to leave the game for a few minutes. Came back, but he just slammed him. I think Jeannot has been, probably the biggest surprise rookie.
No question. I mean, you're right about that.
Well, here's the scoring race for rookies. Raymond is leading with 32 points. Zegras 29, Jeannot at 25, Seider at 25, and tied for 5th. Russ, I
know who it is.
Anton Lundell, he was a plus 15. If you value plus minus, and he is tied, and it has the exact stats as Michael Bunting.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. But the thing is though about Lundell, and look, I just wrote about Bunting for Go GTS. People could check my timeline because I said people should collect them because you should. I mean, he doesn't have a ton of rookie cards out there. Anyhow, as far as this goes with Lundell, the fact that he's their number 3 center and maybe their best penalty killer should definitely put him ahead of a few of these guys. He's not going to win the award, but it just shows you how much of a stud this guy is. Like it's just this is on a great team. It's not like he's on a team like, I don't know, the Sabres or something where he could afford to do this. And if he makes some mistakes, no big deal. He's on a team with Florida that's just trouncing teams now.
Yeah, the report that you mentioned, Russ, about DeBrincat came from Frank Cervalli, who said that DeBrincat, Hagel, and Kubalik are all potentially available. Yeah, Kubalik and DeBrincat are only their 2 best young scorers. So if they're deciding to move either one of them,
I really highly doubt it.
Yeah. Just to finish off the show here and going non-hockey here. So I mentioned, it's football weekend. So what game will you be watching, or Russ, is it because the Jets aren't in the playoffs, you're not going to watch any at all?
Oh, I'll watch. I mean, if that were the case, I wouldn't be watching any football playoffs for like 10 years. Like, why would I? I wouldn't do that to myself. And Kevin Allen would never watch playoff football in his entire life.
Football in 60 years.
Last time you watched playoff football was in black and white.
Yeah. Well, no, it was before my time, actually.
This may surprise people, but I think the Rams-Bucks game could turn into the best one because if if there's any team that has a chance of beating Brady and a minuscule chance with the guys that they have on the pass rush, they may be able to slow them down a little. And Stafford conceivably could throw 3 or 4 touchdowns. So this has the chance to be an amazing game, even though I know everybody else is going to probably go with other games except for Kev. So
no, that's my game. Definitely. My wife is totally invested in Stafford. She wants him to have success because he didn't have it here, and fans were on him at the end. So she's definitely rooting for him, and I'm with her just for the same reason. I like those kind of when guys move on and then they have success and people go, oh, geez, maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was the fact that, he never had a running back his entire time.
Right.
And last week he had to share the throwing exploits with OBJ, so which was a little strange. But Anthony, so now I'm sorry to say the Eagles have been eliminated. So who are you? Are you gonna ride the Bucks train since they're the ones who beat the Eagles?
No, not at all. Actually, the game I'm actually really looking forward to the Bills Chiefs game. That's the one I'm most looking forward to because of the Bill, Andy Reid's offense versus that Bills defense is to me a fascinating story to watch. I'm always I was, for the most part, again, during Andy Reid's tenure, liked him as the head coach here in Philadelphia, was happy. He won a Super Bowl, thankfully, after the Eagles won. Otherwise, it might have felt a little different. But that's the game. Both of those games, like the game that you mentioned as well, but the Chiefs out of the AFC, without question for me, it's the Bills-Chiefs game I'm fascinated by this weekend.
I got a question before we take off real quick, mostly for maybe for Russ, because I know he pays attention to these kind of things. I've noticed, in the last couple of games of the regular season and in the first week of the playoffs, we had reached a point several years ago where running backs had become irrelevant. Where there's so much passing, we don't look at them the same way as we did when, 10 years ago, even, or 15. Like, we don't talk about 2,000-yard rushers. They're just not.
Right.
Well, all of a sudden, I thought late in the regular season and then last week in the playoffs, a bunch of guys broke off long runs. You think the running back's coming back?
It's back. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, the Indianapolis running back? I've been watching him all year. Like, he's tremendous. The only chance that the Titans have is if Derrick Henry's healthy. I think it's back in a big way, but I think nobody still wants to talk about it because it's a quarterback league. But I think you're right.
I don't think it's back in the sense that, now all of a sudden it's going to be like Earl Campbell and Eric Dickerson.
Right. I don't think it's like that. It's far more dynamic now. The way that the running backs are deployed, even in a lot of circumstances, you have, the size of some of the wide receivers are part of now the running attack on certain plays as well.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony, I think
like Deebo Samuel.
I think it's circumstantial here when it comes to like in Buffalo. Devin Singletary has been great the last few weeks because the weather has been crappy and they've needed to run the ball. And, they really couldn't throw the ball effectively against, I think it was Atlanta or even early on against the Jets because of the weather and Singletary, and they devoted themselves to the running game. But I think other teams, Cam Akers came back with the Rams, and before he had his injury, he was an excellent running back. I think
but if you have a premier running back right now in the league, then your quarterback doesn't have to throw 60 times a game. And that is a big deal, especially, again, if you're facing a team like with Tom Brady and you want to keep him off the field.
But if your offense can't throw the ball, again, we saw what happened with.
I get it with the Eagles, but they don't have a premier back.
So I'm not talking about the Eagles. I'm talking about the Colts.
Oh, the Colts.
Jonathan Taylor. Again, if your quarterback is unreliable,
you have to have a quarterback still,
like Carson Wentz has become.
Right.
You have to have. At the end of the day, you need to have some level. You have to have a diverse.
I think you have to have the three-headed monster of a great receiver, a quarterback, and a running back. I think you have to have that.
Teams at the end of the year decided, okay, we're going to stack 9 in the box against Taylor and let Carson Wentz beat us, and he couldn't.
Right.
So that's but the point about Brady and why that game, that Rams Tampa game might be very exciting is the fact that Brady doesn't have Ronald Jones and he doesn't have Fournette probably in that game, and they're going to be teeing off on him because he's going to be throwing the ball 50 times.
Yeah.
So
that pass rush is tough, boy.
It's a tough. That's a tough pass rush. It reminds me of the sack exchange from the Jets, because they had 2 premier sack guys on that line, and that's tough to deal with. Man.
Aaron Donald and Von Miller.
One final question for Mike, because I wondered about this. When is the last time, if ever, that you went into a game when your team was playing and you thought they were going to win? Number one. And number two, have you ever gone into a game and saying, man, I don't know whether they're going to win or lose, but this is just going to be an entertaining game. I'm looking forward to seeing it as entertaining. Or are you just so invested with the wins and losses that you can't enjoy it?
Second question first, no. First question, and this will explain a lot. Super Bowl 25.
Okay.
That was when they played the Giants. I thought the Bills were going to win, and they lost.
So because of one missed kick.
No, Russ. And I didn't think the Leafs were going to, the Leafs in 93 when they came back from 5-2 to tie at 5-5 with Wendell Clark scoring the hat trick in Game 6, and then they get screwed by Kerry Fraser. I mean, I thought when they won Game 5 in overtime, I didn't think they were going to win the series. Everybody in Toronto
did. It's also a much younger Mike in Buffalo we're talking about.
Yes, this is before Mike in Buffalo.
Your worldview has become far more jaded since then.
Yes. I was a bitter old man when I was 26, Anthony. All right, we'll be back on Monday with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. For Kevin Allen, for Anthony Mangione, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.